What is going on, everyone? My name is Andy. Welcome back to another FPL video for pre-season 2021-22. In this one, we're looking at the top 8 best value players throughout the whole game. So we're looking at forwards, midfielders and defenders who I think, for whatever reason, are underpriced, and I'm going to talk about those reasons, the fixtures, the prospects and all that good stuff. Obviously this is still quite an early look, so if things massively change I'll do another video on it, and I'll also split it down into kind of best defenders, best midfielders and best forwards to look at a broader range of players in future videos as well. So there's plenty planned, so don't panic about that. Do give it a like if you enjoy it and hit that subscribe button. Let's try and get to 200k by the start of the season. Otherwise, let's jump into the first player. Okay, so let's start off with the man on the thumbnail. Just to, before we go into the rest of the players as well, the stats on screen. So you got XG, so expected goals per 90 minutes, expected assists per 90 minutes. And the reason I use per 90 is it kind of makes it even for everybody. But of course, you have to take into account that not every player will play a full 90 minutes and not every player is necessarily nailed. So yes, 90 minutes is good because it keeps it fair, but you also have to add your own context. So Jota, for example, is not someone that's always going to play 90 minutes and not always going to start, which we'll talk about in just a second. Then obviously we've got goals and assists from last year, plus how many points per match they scored last year as well. Now, the thing with Liverpool is the fixtures are brilliant, right? Apart from that Chelsea game in game week 3, Norwich, Burnley, Leeds, Palace and Brentford, as an attacker, they are all extremely good fixtures. So most of us are going to be piling on to Liverpool players. Salah will definitely be in nearly everyone's team. He'll be in everyone's captain for game week 1, I'm sure. And then probably a defender, whether that's Trent or Robertson. And then a lot of people want to find a way to fit a third Liverpool player in. Now, Mane is obviously an option, but he's very expensive. So then it comes down to another defender, whether that's Van Dijk if he's fit, Robertson, etc. Or maybe Jota for 7.5 million. Now, stats-wise, he's brilliant, right? That expected goals and expected assists combined is exactly the same level that Salah hit last year. The difference is Jota is 5 million less. Now, there's a reason that he's so underpriced because, like I said, he doesn't necessarily always start. He does kind of rotate. Either sometimes he comes in as part of like a front four with Firmino, Salah, Mane. Sometimes he plays through the middle instead of Firmino. He can play on the left instead of Mane. He doesn't tend to play too much on the right. Salah doesn't get rested that often. But he could play there as well. So he can play anywhere across that front three. And obviously, realistically, or hopefully, we want him to play in that front four. So you are taking a risk by going for him. But when you've got someone whose underlying stats are as good as Mo Salah's, apart from he's 5 million cheaper, it's potentially worth a risk. Because if you go into these fixtures without him, he's the kind of player that can get 2 returns in one game. Suddenly, his price is going up because everyone can get to him because he's quite cheap. You're paying extra for him for a player that you probably should have considered right from the start. And the only real worry is that Chelsea game. So, obviously, there's a minutes issue there. But I think outside of that, he looks brilliant. 12.8% owned. Obviously, don't worry too much about that. Again, it's quite early on in the season. But if we see, especially in pre-season and stuff like that Liverpool roll out a front four quite a lot, I think we could see minutes for him. He is someone as well that almost always comes off the bench. So you never really get 0 points. Now, sometimes that's not a good thing because you want your sub player, if you've got a good first bench, to come on. But he always gives you something. You can maybe get something off the bench as well. So 9 goals in the minutes he had is not too bad. He can definitely perform at a higher level than that. And I think with the fixtures, he is definitely potentially worth a risk because it's going to be very hard to get Salah, Mane and Trent in your teams. You're going to have to skimp a bit. And maybe the risk of minutes is worth it with Jota. Okay, so Iheanacho up next. One of the things I didn't mention with Jota is one of the reasons Salah's so much more expensive is not just that he's absolutely nailed on, but he's also on penalties. And there's quite a similarity here between Iheanacho and Vardy because Iheanacho is 7.5 and there's lots of forwards that are 7.5 or 8 million, by the way. So it's not that he's a completely brilliant price, but the stats that he performs at or his underlying numbers for expected goals, expected assists are super high. And he actually performs at the same level as Jamie Vardy did last season. Obviously, Vardy's 3 million more for 2 reasons. He's completely nailed on, just like Salah, and he's on penalties as well. And unless age suddenly catches up with him, he's not going to miss too many games, right? Obviously, Leicester will be in Europe next year, so that might hurt him a little bit. We'll have to see how many games Iheanacho gets, but he's definitely an option, right? 0.3 expected goals and 0.18 expected assists. Like 0.61 combined is extremely high. Not too many players that get regular minutes would have had higher than that, especially for 7.5 million. Like Jota runs him close, but even Jota isn't quite that high, I don't think. Points per match was 4.4, so pretty decent. 12 goals and 2 assists. He didn't get as many minutes as someone like a Jamie Vardy, but he still absolutely performed. And at the back end of last season, he was performing better than Jamie Vardy. He was the one that was getting the goals for Leicester. And so, yeah, played really well. Fixtures-wise, it's not necessarily ideal. Now, I'll tell you what I've done with the fixtures. Most of this is based on expected data, so expected goals conceded or expected goals in general for an attacking point of view. And then I've looked at the numbers for the whole of last season, and I have amended them slightly because I didn't want to put Brighton down as hard a fixture as Man City, but their underlying stats were extremely good last year, so I've kind of downgraded them by 1. And obviously, you know, you can put your own context around it. Will Potter still be at the club next year? Will they lose Basuma? And if they do, that obviously probably makes them a bit of a weaker team if they don't make their own transfers in to kind of fill in those voids, right? So we got to take some context in there, but I didn't want to just completely put Brighton as a green fixture because I don't think it is. So Wolves, West Ham, Brighton, Man City are not the most ideal fixtures. Norwich away and Burnley at home to make up the first 6 are pretty decent. So I don't think the Wolves at home and West Ham away would put me off a 7.5 million striker that can do what Iheanacho can do, but they're not necessarily ideal. Right, so he might be someone to wait just a little bit longer. I don't think Leicester's opening fixtures are maybe as good as they look on paper, but I do think from a value perspective, when you're performing at the same level as someone who's 3 million more, you're underpriced and therefore you are potential value. So once we get closer to the start of the season, of course, we'll see which other players around the same price as him, like the Wilsons, the Watkins, Bamford, etc., what they're looking like. But Iheanacho is a genuine option. There's no reason he couldn't get goals in those first 2 games. Talking of Brighton, talking about those great underlying stats team, Brighton, right? If it regresses this year, they're looking good. I also think, by the way, we're all going to look like idiots, especially me, talking about them as this really good defensive team if they don't regress and they continue to not keep clean sheets. But the fixtures are definitely there. Burnley away, Watford at home, Brentford away and Palace away. 4 really great fixtures for clean sheets in the first 6. And then the tough fixtures at Everton and Leicester. So it's not completely awful. They haven't got to play like a Liverpool, Man United, a Man City, etc. And he's only 4.5 million. So you've got Dunk in there at 5 million. Not very injury prone, so might be worth the 0.5 million extra. He's also very good from set pieces as well. So I wouldn't completely rule out buying Dunk, but if we're talking about value, I'm going to go for the player that's a little bit cheaper. Attacking-wise, he didn't get too many minutes. The problem was he had it felt like a constant hamstring injury where he wasn't going to make the game, then he did, and then he'd have to come off early. Sometimes that was before 60 minutes, sometimes it was after. And then he basically had an injury which kind of ruled him out for a long time last season. And we're still waiting to make sure that he's definitely fit for the start of the season. If not, by the way, someone like Ben White could be an option as well at Brighton. But at that point, I probably would just pay the extra 0.5 and get Dunk. But Lamptey, 3.2 points per match wasn't too bad. 1 goal and 3 assists, though. I think he only played less than 900 minutes. So the talent is there. We know how good he is. He can beat a man. His expected data, 0.17 for a defender, is pretty high, okay? It's not as high as like Trent Alexander-Arnold or Robertson, but he's also nowhere near their price, right? So he's playing for a team that can do it. Right, they can get those clean sheets. We just need to see them convert their underlying numbers into, actual FPL points and points on the Premier League table. But I really like to look at him for 4.5. Now, I know a lot of people are looking at Sanchez, the goalkeeper. I don't think with those fixtures that are double up is completely out of the question. The question really just remains, is he going to be fit? If he is, I really like the idea of starting with him. Raphinha is a name you are going to hear a lot in pre-season. Honestly, when I saw his price, I was surprised, okay? I think there's a couple of things, right? Can a player perform at the same level as someone higher, therefore they're underpriced? Or how much do you expect them to be before you see the prices? And I thought he was going to be at least 7.5 million, maybe even 8. And they've kept him at 6.5. I think he started last year at 5.5. He obviously went up a little bit, then went down. But 6.5 is a great price. That's why his ownership's already over 30%. Arguably, the fixtures aren't that good for Leeds, right? Man United away, Liverpool at home in the first 4. Other tough fixtures outside of that, West Ham and Everton. But the thing for me, if Leeds carry on like they did last year, they are one of the best attacks in the league. I think they're in the top 5 for expected goals last year. So we know how good they are in attack. Forget that their defence hasn't been great for most of last season. In attack, they're brilliant, right? And his numbers, so that's 0.54 expected goal involvement per 90 minutes. To give you some context, that's the kind of level that like a Mahrez or a Foden would have performed at last year for Man City, at least very close to anyway. So you're getting a player that's only 6.5 million, who's performing at a level of like a Man City forward, playing for a team that's in the top 5 for expected goals. He looks extremely good. He got 16 attacking returns already last season. I think, for me, the reason why I'm looking at him from the get-go, I don't think there's too many options who are better for that price. And if you're trying to fit in a lot of premiums, you need some cheaper players in there as well. He's definitely comparable to the cheap strikers that are like 7.5 or 8 million, because his underlying numbers are great. He gets an extra point for a clean sheet. He gets an extra point for a goal, etc. as well. And also, if he can get some returns in those tougher fixtures in the first 6 games, well, after that, the fixtures continue to be brilliant. So Watford, Southampton, Wolves, Norwich are the 4 fixtures after game week 6. So he's potentially someone you can just set in there and forget about, and he'll just keep ticking over steadily, even in some of the tougher games as well. So I can't see much reason not to go with him. The only thing I could think of really is if some player comes to the fore that we don't really know about already, like a transfer comes in or a player swaps clubs, etc., that's already been priced quite low. And otherwise, I just don't really see why you wouldn't go for him, unless you're absolutely booking in an early wild card. Let's say you told yourself you're going to wild card in game week 5 or 6, then fair enough. Maybe you just skip the Liverpool, Man United and Everton games and just don't worry about the Burnley game. But he looks great for 6.5. He was one of the first names in my first draft. So talking of 6.5 million midfielders, Saka is definitely another one to consider. Now, there are 2 reasons why I prefer Raphinha, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you can only have one of them. And obviously, taking into fixtures matters as well. So if you think Arsenal's fixtures are better, or when you do decide to bring in a 6.5 million midfielder, if they're better then of course you definitely look at Saka. But with Raphinha, based on last year's numbers, his numbers were just better, right? Expected goals and expected assists, although Saka's are still very good at 0.24 and 0.17, so 0.41 overall. It's a bit lower than the likes of Foden, Mahrez and Raphinha, but again, he's a really good price too. But also Leeds were more attacking, so can Arsenal step it up? These are the questions we have to ask ourselves ahead of next season. But also Saka's very young, right? So he's only going to improve, I think. And he was one of the most played players under Arteta last year. So he's fairly nailed. He did play some games as well, which is going to hurt the numbers at left back. So he didn't play all the games in an attacking sense, but I just don't see why that would happen next year. I just think Tierney, when he's fit, is definitely going to play in that position. And then hopefully they'll have some other cover that can play there that doesn't involve playing Saka, because he is just too good to be playing as a left back. He needs to play as a forward and get Arsenal going forward. Like we saw, I'm recording this actually just after the England match he's played in against Czech Republic. We saw how much he progresses the ball and carries it forward. That is a problem for defences. He has to play in one of the forward positions for Arsenal. Now, fixtures-wise, the game week 2 and 3 is just not great. Right, Chelsea and Man City, they're literally the 2 worst teams you can play as an attacker. They are the 2 best defences in the league. The good thing is, though, outside of that, Brentford, Norwich and Burnley are extremely good. And after Spurs, they have Brighton, Palace, Villa, Leicester, Watford. So they're not perfect fixtures, but they're also not bad. He's another player that for 6.5, like Raphinha, you could just stick in to your team and then just leave them. Let them tick over. They're going to get you the odd goal or assist here or there. They're not going to score the same as a Salah or a Fernandes or a De Bruyne. But again, they're not at that price. So Saka I really like. I wouldn't necessarily put him in as ahead of Raphinha, but I do think there's a case to be made to have both of them. I think for their price, they can definitely outscore players that are more expensive. So Saka should definitely be on the watch list ahead of game week 1. So I've got to be honest, I was a little bit confused when I saw Fofana's price. And if I'm thinking that he should be priced more, therefore, he's got to be a value player, right? Now, I don't necessarily think he's massively attacking or anything like that. You look at the numbers, he wasn't last year. 1 assist, no goals. But Soyuncu in the same team, I think he only got 1 goal and no assists. So, obviously, the goal is worth more. But in terms of attacking returns, they both got 1 each. And yet, Soyuncu's been put at 5 million. Now, part of that might be for nailed-onness. But if you look at Fofana's numbers last year, how many times he played 90 minutes, it was extremely high. He played a lot of games. Now, towards the end of the season, there was some times, which I remember, where they were playing 5 at the back and he decided to switch to a 4, and Fofana did come off. But one of the reasons that happened was it was during Ramadan, and Brendan Rodgers spoke about how if they could give him a rest, then they would, and they did that a few times. So I've seen Leicester fans, they can't get their head around this price. They think he's about as nailed on as it gets, okay? Whether Leicester go to a back 3 or just a standard back 4, right? He should play either way. And the fixtures are looking pretty good. Wolves, Norwich, Burnley at home, 3 really good fixtures. And the tough ones, to be fair, West Ham, Brighton, which aren't too bad. And obviously Man City is extremely tough. So overall, the fixtures aren't that bad. And also, when you've got a 4.5 million defender, you don't have to play them every game. They go into a rotation. It just feels weird to say that about a Leicester player, because usually you're paying 5 or 5.5. Now, there again, a bit like Lamptey for Brighton, there are potentially some reasons to pay extra. Okay, if James Justin was to get fit at any point, for 5 million, so for 0.5 more, he is a bit more attacking. So he could be worth it. If you think Leicester are going to get some clean sheets, you also want to get some attacking returns, then he could be good. But with Fofana, right, the bread and butter, we all know this for a defender, is the clean sheet. Could Leicester get one for Wolves, Norwich and Burnley? Probably. Could they get one for West Ham and Brighton? Maybe. Man City, not so much. I get that. But in between those tough or those easy fixtures, you could just put him on the bench like any other 4.5 million defender. So there's a reason he's 27% owned, because no one can believe that he's 4.5 million. He's an extremely good value player. He's in my squad. I can't see too many reasons to move him, but I will do a video on cheap defenders, probably at 4.5 or below, or maybe 5 and below. And I'm sure he's going to be right at the top of that list as well. So I really like him. There's not too many reasons not to go for him unless Justin is back and fit and firing. But Fofana just looks nailed. And he's cheaper than the other centre-backs. It's a no-brainer, right? Okay, so for the last 2 players, they're maybe slightly controversial because they're definitely not completely nailed on, right? With Iheanacho, as long as they play a 2, right? Because they could go with 1 strike and it could just be Vardy. But if they play a 2, you'd expect him to start. And with Jota, again, not completely nailed on, but you do expect him to get some good minutes. With Rodrigo, it's a little bit harder to tell because he was in the team. I think then he got injured and then he wasn't in the team, but then he came in at the end as well, to the point where Bamford was actually benched at one point. We should say the league was kind of over then, so I wouldn't read too much into it. But Bamford's 8 million. That could be value, right? I think it's a fair price, but it's not that much valuable that I would put him in this video. But for Rodrigo, you get someone with just as good numbers almost, but for 1.5 million less. Now, Bamford's on penalties. Again, that is a big talking point. But we need to see how he fits Rodrigo and Bamford into the team. I can't imagine that Rodrigo is going to sit on the bench for much longer and just not play a part when he's fit. But towards the end of the season, Rodrigo was playing as a 9 at points, but before that he had played as a 10. Whether or not he gives Bielsa enough control in that might be part of the problem. But again, you're looking at a player 0.44 expected goals, 0.17 expected assists. Didn't get a hell of a lot of minutes, still got 7 goals, still got 4 assists. When you're a player that plays in those forward positions, striker, number 10, wide forwards, wingers, whatever you want to call them, in that Leeds team, you are good for points because they are so attacking, right? We don't need to go through the fixtures again because I already spoke about them for Raphinha, but they're not that bad. So if Bamford gets injured, or if we see that Rodrigo's in as a 9 or maybe just behind Bamford or whatever way that Bielsa sets them up, for 6.5 million, that's going to be so cheap. Again, those numbers, right? You're looking at what, like 0.61, I think that is, off the top of my head. Yeah, 0.61. That's so good for 6.5 million. There aren't many strikers in the whole league that perform at that level, especially for that price. Obviously, minutes are an issue, but this is a player that could be value in the right situation. We just need to keep a major eye on it. Okay, so another controversial one here. The first 6 players I did, I think, are genuine options. The last 2, Rodrigo and Abraham, yes, there has to be particular scenarios where they're good options, but hear me out. I know, before you go and tell me in the comments, if Abraham is still at Chelsea next year, he is not an option. It's clear that he is not fancied as a number 9, okay? Werner can play there. Havertz has played there towards the end of the season. He didn't get many minutes, although he still scored 6 goals and got 2 assists. So we don't even need to talk about the fixtures, which, by the way, aren't very good for Chelsea at all. But he is a really good player, okay? And I think there's many teams in the league where he could lead the line. And I think Chelsea are looking to, maybe buy Haaland. They've already got Havertz. They've got Werner. They've got money to burn. Why do they need to keep Abraham? They could loan him out. They could sell him. There's a lot of talk about it, right? If I have a quick look at the list of teams that he could lead the line of. Brighton, for sure. West Ham, for sure. I think Antonio's brilliant, by the way. I love Antonio, but the injury record's not great. They're in Europe, etc. He could lead the line for that team. I mean, he could do it at Leeds as well, I suspect, but obviously they got some really good strikers there already. I think Leicester, maybe, but obviously with Vardy still playing and Iheanacho doing so well, they're apparently going to buy Daka as well. That's probably gone. But I even think Wolves, if Jimenez wasn't getting back to his best or couldn't play for a little while longer, he could lead the line there. His numbers are so good. 0.56 expected goals per 90. Obviously, that's on a small sample size last season. But even looking at the season before, I've got the numbers here. It was 0.57 and he played a little bit more. So he's always had fairly good numbers. And those numbers usually translate into FPL points, right? So if we see him get a move to another Premier League team at 6.5 million, if he's going to be the leading striker, that is extreme value, right? And again, I don't want to just put obvious players on here because, I mean, everyone knows that Raphinha, Saka, etc. are good value. It's good to talk about them still because sometimes we ignore the obvious picks and just look for differentials and stuff. But you've got to keep an eye on Abraham. Depending on the team that he goes to, if it's another Premier League club, because there is talk about Dortmund and stuff like that, I think he's brilliant value at 6.5 and I will look to try and get him in my team. There we go. That is it for this one. Thank you very much for watching. If you haven't already, please do hit that like button and hit subscribe. Help us grow the channel to 200,000 subscribers before the start of the season. We could even be the first FPL channel to do that. And of course, if you haven't already left the video to go and do this, leave a comment below and let me know who you think are the best value players and how many players on this list do you already have in your team. I'd say there's quite a few already. I'll have plenty more FPL content to come throughout pre-season, so keep an eye out for that. Hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell, but for now I will leave it there. Hopefully this helped. If it did, give it a like and I'll see you soon.